West Coast Cookbook and Speakeasy with Chef Justice Putnam. Netrootsradio.com.
Je voudrais du soleil vert, des dentelles et des théières, des photos de bord de mer, dans mon jardin d'hiver. Je voudrais de la lumière, comme en Nouvelle-Angleterre. Je veux changer d'atmosphère, dans mon jardin d'hiver. À fleurs sous la pluie de novembre, tes mains qui courent, je n'en peux plus de t'attendre. Les années passent, qu'il est loin, là je tombe. Nul ne peut nous entendre. Je voudrais du Fred Astaire, revoir un latte Goël.
We're trying to figure out how we can get this job done today. We talked to Mitch about it earlier. He's not in the room right now, but he was with us earlier and said, we want to expedite this, and hopefully they could confine it to just one complaint, Arizona, and then we could vote, and it would be, then just move forward with the rest of the state. The overriding wish is to do it at the Capitol. What we are being told very directly is it's going to take days for the Capitol to be okay again.
During the January 6th insurrection, as the violent mob stormed and ransacked the Capitol, it was then Speaker Nancy Pelosi who took charge, making calls to the vice president and other leaders to bring in the National Guard and quell the riot. What the president should have been doing. Fast forward to today, and the House Republican Conference is now in the process of possibly elevating a congressman to the speakership, who Liz Cheney herself said partially bears responsibility for what happened that day. Extraordinary. Joining me now is House Speaker Emerita Nancy Pelosi. Speaker Emerita Pelosi, thank you so much for being here. It's always a pleasure. When I go back and I watch that footage of you that day, it is a reminder that the speaker is second in line to the presidency. And when you had a president who was refusing to be president, and you had a vice president who was hiding and fearing for his life, it was the speaker who had to take charge. And you did that. The idea that the person in that position, if something catastrophic were to happen to the Capitol again, would be an insurrectionist, somebody who was on the side of the insurrectionists, I can't wrap my mind around it fully, and I wonder what you make of it.
Well, first let me say, Chuck Schumer, we were there together.
Yes.
Together, calling the president, asking him, really beseeching him to send the National Guard, talking to the then Secretary of Defense and asking him, and the Secretary of the Army, McCarthy was his name, to send, and they just weren't doing it. And then they lie about it. That's their thing. And again, and Mitch McConnell was even with us on taking it back to the Capitol.
Right.
And taking it back to the Capitol. So these House Republicans were just, they didn't have any interest in the peaceful transfer of power. They were in denial about the election. And for all the horror of that day, the violence, the desecration of the Capitol, this temple of democracy in the world, the violation of our Constitution to have that day being the acceptance of the Electoral College vote. The whole thing, the assault on our democracy. After we went back to the Capitol, took the vote, overwhelmingly, the Republicans voted against accepting the results of the Electoral College.
Yeah.
And this person that they're putting forth to be Speaker of the House, it's just appalling.
And today he was asked, do you accept the results of the election? He wouldn't answer that question today.
No.
I've walked through that Capitol with you, and I can see how much you revere that building, how much you look around and feel the awe of it and the awe of your position. There's nothing in that in this person. Liz Cheney literally called him out by name as somebody who, in her view, was involved in the plot to overturn the election. Have any Republicans come to you privately and said, we understand, Ken Buck has said it publicly, we cannot elevate somebody who does not accept the results of the election and who was part of the insurrection? He said he can't do it. Have any Republicans come to you privately and said, this cannot happen and we won't let it happen?
No. But the fact is that the Mr. Jordan and his friends do a real disservice to their members on the Republican side to call upon them once, maybe more, we'll see tomorrow, to vote for such a person for Speaker. They're going to have to answer to their conscience, to their children, to their own legacy for doing something so disreputable. Now, for some of them, it's a good match. Some of them are just right in there with them. But for some of them, you could just see this has to be very painful for them. We're rather thinking we don't agonize, we organize. We have to get going for the next election. Just think of how recent it was when Kevin had 15 votes to become Speaker. It was 10 months ago?
Yeah.
Well, in that period of time, pretty soon, we'll have Hakeem Jeffries, and we'll be voting for him very proudly for what he's doing for the people, honoring the oath of office to protect and defend the Constitution of the United States. They are for the people and not this other person that they're nominating, Jordan, doesn't have any legislation, not a legislator,
Nothing.
never passed a legislation. His big bill is to criminalize a woman's right to choose with no exceptions.
Right.
With no exceptions, the harshest possible position. Again, not accepting the results of the election. But voting, again, you just see these people voting for him when he voted against disaster assistance, when fires came to their area, when storms and hurricanes that's why you see some people voting against him from New York. But there are many others who are voting against the interest of their constituents because you know why? The instigator of the insurrection, Donald Trump, has asked them
has told them to. Let me play what another former speaker, John Boehner, had to say about Jim Jordan. Here he is.
You call some of these members political terrorists.
Oh, yeah. Jim Jordan especially. My colleague from Ohio. I just never saw a guy who spent more time tearing things apart and never building anything, never putting anything together.
Kevin McCarthy, with the exact same majority that you had, and you were able to be very effective as Speaker with that majority, he couldn't do anything. He couldn't accomplish a thing other than get himself ousted when he was Speaker. What would the House of Representatives look like with somebody who John Boehner has called a political terrorist in charge? What would happen? Are we going to have a government shutdown? Like, what happens?
Well, let me just say, first of all, I had a majority of 2. 3, there were 5, and then there were 4, then there were 3, and then there were...
Then it was 2.
2. Yeah. So it was a very even slimmer majority than what they have. But let's just take it to the public. President Lincoln said, public sentiment is everything. With it, you can accomplish almost anything. Without it, practically nothing.
Yeah.
The public has to understand what is at stake. Our democracy is at stake. What have the Republicans accomplished at all, even when they had a president in the White House from time to time?
An enormous tax cut for the super rich and
That's
corporations.
83% of the benefits went to the top 1%, and it added $2 trillion to the national debt.
It did.
They give that kind of break to the top 1% while they take 30% of food from the mouths of babies. They take 80% from the Title I education for children in poor economic deprived areas. They take, well, the list goes on and on. And you know what? Just about every one of them voted every way, that way.
Yeah.
Now, some of them have said this is a bridge too far
Right.
for our democracy. And we respect differences of opinion.
Sure.
That's our democracy. We welcome the fray, the conversation, the debate. It's not a question of, I don't like what you believe, so therefore you're not right. No, that's your right. You represent your district, and that's it. But if you're not honoring the oath of office, if you don't respect our democracy, that is a line that cannot be crossed.
And well said. I want to give you an opportunity, since I have you here. I'm lucky enough to have you here to let you comment on what is happening in Israel. The president is on his way there. He will now not be meeting with the leaders of Jordan and Egypt, et cetera, because of that hospital bombing. Your thoughts on what's happening?
Well, the president of the United States has been excellent. I mean, just think, well, I'm very proud of his domestic agenda, but globally, he brought NATO together. In fact, NATO is stronger, despite what Putin thought would happen. He brought people together, listening, countries together, not condescending. America wants this. Let's work together on how we can fight for democracy in Ukraine and help the Ukrainians, and God bless them for their courage. And with Israel, I love when somebody said the other day, nobody wrote that speech for him. Israel is our friend in the region, shared values, a national security interest of us, ours in the vet. And so he has given his full support, as do I, to Israel in this. What Hamas did was outside the circle of civilized human behavior. What they did was barbaric, but it was barbaric. And people said, well, they did it because of this. No. They did it. It was barbaric. Now, I have confidence in the people of Israel. I always tell the story of when I was there as speaker, I went to visit a hospital there, and they told me they had just treated a Palestinian who had done violence there. And they said, we treated the Jewish person and the Palestinian the same. We didn't treat the Palestinian because he was Jewish. We treated him well because we're Jewish. And I believe that overwhelmingly the people of Israel don't want to see children and women and families disrupted, but war is war, and the Hamas must pay a price for this.
It is Wednesday, the 18th of October of 2023, and you are in West Coast Cookbook and Speakeasy. I am your chef de cuisine, Justice Putnam. Gunner, the English bulldog, is our snoozing sous chef. Precious, our little Yorkie, is the door girl, and she will be seating you directly for our especially special daily special, Smothered Benedict Wednesdays. Will no one rid us of these meddlesome priests? Will no one? Well, that, of course, as you know, is taken from the movie Becket. That's right. And it was only, the quote was actually about one priest, which would have been Bishop Becket. Get rid of him. But in our new Agogo world, there are many, many of those priests. And I'm not saying that necessarily Becket was the bad guy. I'm just saying that we got a lot of priests out there stirring things up. That's right. And why do I mention that? Because there is a gross amount of misinformation coming out of this war between Israel and Hamas. At first, I have to say, I questioned the legitimacy of the reportage on the so-called missile attack on the hospital in Gaza, purportedly by the Israelis, because I thought, well, who stands to gain by an act like that? Right as Joe is about to step on the plane to come over here for a summit with the Israelis, along with the leaders of Jordan, Egypt, the Hezbollah, just 4 or 5 Arab leaders or of the Arab world were to meet with Joe. Now, who has been an actor involved in messing up the peace process every step of the way. Yes, that would be Hamas. Yes, it would be. Why was Sadat killed? Huh? Because he was trying to broker a two-state deal with the Israelis. Why was Rabin killed? Because extremist Israeli didn't want him to broker a two-state deal with the Arabs and the Palestinians. Just don't want it. So there are very conservative religious actors involved in this who apparently just do not want peace, because if peace comes, well then, I guess they're out of a job? What is their job? So Joe went ahead and flew over there anyway. I would think that maybe he's still going to extend a hand to the other team, or at least to, the people in the stands over there, the spectators. It would be nice if there was some sort of back channel and being able to speak with the leaders of Jordan, Egypt, et al. And that still may happen. So I also wondered about the strategy of announcing this summit before it happened. It might have been a bit better knowing how Hamas works, that had been put on the low until it was actually underway. That would have been nice. Because we are not dealing... Well, I take that back. I was going to say we're not dealing with rational actors. I actually think we are dealing with rational actors. They just happen to be very, very evil. So, and that's not to say that Bibi and his heavy-handedness are, given an excuse here. No, they're not. No, they are not. But I still cannot get over the abject brutality that Hamas exacted upon innocents. Because it seems like all we're hearing now, and I got to say, I don't like the idea of innocent Gazans or Palestinians being killed. I do not. But it's not the Israelis abducting people for human shields, is it? Now, I also have to mention that the idea of Hamas storing missiles and armaments in hospitals is not new. So any kind of explosion that could have occurred at that hospital could have been exacerbated by the armaments already there. Accounts of 500 people being killed are now being criticized as being grossly overestimated. And I got to say, whatever it was didn't hit the hospital. It was in the parking lot. Now, Joe says that his own Department of Defense gave him reports that it wasn't the Israelis behind this attack. And it may not have necessarily been, quote, an attack. It could have been, as the Israelis have been positing, an accident. Because another thing that we know about Hamas is that they don't really have great quality control on their missiles. This would not be the first time that a Hamas missile didn't get to its target. Now, on the other hand, knowing Bibi and his group, they're able to dissemble the truth quite readily themselves. So this is the problem. We have to take everything with a grain of salt. And that's why I'll go with Joe on this, because our Department of Defense has some pretty good eyes in the sky. And I bet they were able to track whatever it was or wasn't until the explosion. So, I don't want to say that I'm an expert on incendiary devices exploding or any kind of device exploding, but I've listened to a few experts over the years. I think the first time I really paid attention was during the Oklahoma City bombing. Learned a lot about fertilizer bombs then, didn't we? Yes, we did. So, what to make of this? I think that if I were to, give some elderly wisdom, the idea of war is abhorrent. The idea of killing is abhorrent. The idea of power over the innocence of people is abhorrent. I just don't like it. I don't like it perpetrated by any side. I don't like the idea of revenge. And in fact, if this was revenge on Israelis' part, well, that would be a war crime. It would. But exacting justice is a little different. And let's be clear about that, because there were still hundreds killed, and they put it on their GoPros. All right. Also, Hamas did announce a missile launch just before the hospital blew up. Just saying. They're not quiet about it. But when they make a mistake, it's so easy to blame, well, shall we say, the victims? There was no excuse. I am not going to say that Hamas had an excuse to go into Israeli territory and slaughter kids, 20-year-old somethings, in a desert music festival. All right? That was a murderous, terroristic act. Israel was the victim of that. I'm just saying. Okay? So there's no excuse for it. There's no excuse for what happened in terms of Israeli heavy-handedness in the way that they deal with the Arab Street. We can talk about all of that in terms of international law. But this terrorist act perpetrated by Hamas needs to have some justice. There should be no argument about that. But the first thing that we're hearing about any kind of pushback is that, oh, it's genocide. Is it? Is it? If there are war crimes committed by any side, they should be hauled in front of the Hague and dealt with accordingly. Okay, I could go on more about how Fox is insulting Joe's trip. Like, why is he going there? As if we don't know. The reason Fox is upset is because they do not want any news footage of Joe being presidential. It hurts their cause when you've got you-know-who all hopped up on drugs, makeup, and ego, blaming the world for all of his misfortunes. So, of course, Fox doesn't want Joe over there. Where's Jared? I haven't heard anything about Jared. What about his brokering a peace deal? What happened to that? $2 billion in the pocket is what I say. Okay. All right. What do we have in store for you here in the Bistro Cafe as we begin this Smothered Benedict Wednesdays? Yeah, well, Nancy did say that the public has to understand what is at stake over a possible Jordan speakership, and it looks like they're voting as we speak, or should be. Put myself in a bubble, and they're supposed to begin at 11 a.m. Eastern Time, which is when this show starts here on the West Coast at 8. What? Anyway, we'll see how that shakes out. On the rest of the menu, a security problem has taken down the computer systems for almost all Kansas courts for the last 5 days. 5. Disney attorneys want to question a former administrator in its lawsuit with DeSantis appointees. And a federal judge sentenced a former Republican candidate for Michigan governor to 2 months behind bars for his actions during the January 6th insurrection. After the break, we move to the chef's table, where Swedish police arrested 2 people suspected of unauthorized possession of secret information. And citing the stand of the United States, the lower house of the Russian parliament, known as the State Duma, they voted unanimously to revoke the ratification of the Global Nuclear Test Ban Treaty. All that and more on West Coast Cookbook and Speakeasy. Bon appetit. At netrootsradio.com, to the right of the page is the chat room link, and the chat room is monitored by Kelly Lincoln, so go ahead and chat, and thank you, Kelly, for everything that you do. If you out there in radio listening land would now look across that home page to the left from that chat room link, near the bottom of our homepage at netrootsradio.com, you'll notice the link to our Patreon page, and if you could become a recurring Patreon of Netroots Radio, and if you could possibly send us what you might spend on an espresso-type coffee drink, for instance. If you can send those funds to us once a month, we're able to pool those funds with funds sent to us by like-minded folk, and then we are able to put a big dent into our bills and the other costs of running this powerhouse of resistance. And we do thank you to those of you out there who have been so generous over these many years in allowing us to fulfill our civic duty as the founders originally intended so many, many years ago. And we also would like to thank those of you who might consider being generous in the future, because we're not giving up. It looks like they aren't, so we will not either. So thank you for that generosity. If you would like to follow Netroots Radio on Twitter, Mastodon, Spoutable, Blue Sky, wherever, do so at Netroots Radio. Tom takes care of that. Thank you, Tom. Follow me on Twitter, Mastodon, Spoutable, Blue Sky, Instagram, Tumblr, where else? Oh, Facebook, etc. You can do so by going to @JusticePutnam, or simply Justice Putnam, depending, of course. And I post the show notes and links diaries on Daily Co's 10 minutes before showtime, and you can find those show notes and links diaries by following my social media feeds, because the links are there, and you can get right to the actual reportage, which I suggest you do. If you would like to follow the show on Twitter, do so at Cookbook West. And please do pick up podcasts by way of Spreaker, TuneIn, iHeart, YouTube, iTunes, really wherever podcasts can be found. You just can't find them on Stitcher anymore. You just can't. All right. This first offering here in the Bistro Cafe of West Coast Cookbook and Speakeasy comes out of the Associated Press by John Hanna. Computer systems for almost all of Kansas's courts have been offline for 5 days because of what officials call a security incident, preventing them from accepting electronic filings and blocking public access to many of their own records. Judicial branch officials still don't know the extent of the problem or how long the computer systems will remain offline. The problem discovered last Thursday, according to spokesperson Lisa Taylor, meant the systems have not been able to accept electronic filings, process payments, manage cases, grant public access to records, allow people to file electronically for protection from abuse orders, and permit people to apply electronically for marriage licenses. Divorced parents who are supposed to receive child support from their ex-spouses are likely to see delays in the processing of their payments. The State Department for Children and Families announced yesterday, Tuesday. Problems don't affect courts in Johnson County in the Kansas City area, the state's most populous county, because it operates its own computer systems. But State Supreme Court Chief Justice Marla Luckert last week directed the courts in the state's 104 other counties to accept paper filings and filings by fax or mail, suspending a requirement that attorneys file electronically. Mike Schneider of the Associated Press brings us this next offering here in the Bistro Cafe of West Coast Cookbook and Speakeasy, Smothered Benedict Wednesdays. Disney attorneys want to question a previous administrator of the governing district that provides municipal services to Walt Disney World as part of its defense against a state lawsuit brought by a board made up of appointees of Florida Governor Ron DeSantis. Disney attorneys said in court papers on Monday that they have subpoenaed John Clace, the former administrator of what was previously called the Reedy Creek Improvement District, for 55 years until it was renamed the Central Florida Tourism Oversight District earlier this year during a hostile takeover by DeSantis and the Republican-controlled Florida legislature. The takeover of the district, which was previously controlled by Disney allies, came after the company publicly opposed a state law banning classroom lessons on sexual orientation and gender identity in early grades. Following the takeover, Clace was replaced by DeSantis ally Glenn Gilzine. Clace was in charge of the district when the governing body signed agreements with Disney, which shifted control over design and construction at Disney World to the company, and prohibited the district from using the likeness of Disney characters or other intellectual property without Disney's permission. The agreements were signed in February before the district takeover by the DeSantis appointees, who claim the contracts neutered their powers. The appointees are now suing Disney in state court in an attempt to void the deals. Among the records the Disney attorneys are seeking from Clace are documents used to adopt the contracts, documents that support the district's authority to enter the contracts, and information about how the agreements were publicized, according to the court documents filed on Monday. One of the arguments the DeSantis appointees make about why the agreement should be voided is that they were not properly publicized. Disney has filed counterclaims in the state lawsuit, which include asking the state court to declare agreements valid and enforceable. DeSantis has sent a notice to, or Disney has sent a notice to DeSantis's office demanding internal communications, including text messages and emails and documents. And of course, we know DeSantis is currently running for the 2024 GOP presidential nomination. Disney and DeSantis and his allies also are battling in federal court, where the company has sued DeSantis, claiming the governor violated its free speech rights by punishing it for expressing opposition to the law. DeSantis and the Central Florida Tourism Oversight District have asked a federal judge to throw out Disney's First Amendment lawsuit, calling it meritless. Of the Associated Press brings us this final offering here in the Bistro Cafe of West Coast Cookbook and Speakeasy. A federal judge yesterday, Tuesday, sentenced a former Republican candidate for Michigan governor to 2 months behind bars for joining the mob on January 6, where he riled up other insurrectionists and ripped a tarp outside the building. I should note that I've had to make a few editorial changes here so it will comport with the Netroots Radio Style Manual. Let us continue. Ryan Kelly, who finished fourth in a primary field of 5 Republican gubernatorial candidates last year, pleaded guilty in July to a misdemeanor for his role in the siege. Several months before his guilty plea, Kelly posted on social media that the Capitol riot was an FBI setup. His campaign posted the words "political prisoner" on Facebook after his June 2022 arrest. U.S. District Judge Christopher Cooper told Kelly that he misused his platform as a candidate for public office by promoting lies about election fraud, including the baseless claim that January 6 was somehow part of an FBI plot. Kelly, aged 42, traveled from Allendale, Michigan, to D.C. to attend then-President Donald Trump's Stop the Steal rally near the White House on January 6. Kelly, a real estate broker, is not accused of engaging in violence on January 6, but federal prosecutors said he helped breach scaffolding, stirred up the mob with his shouts, and gestured for other rioters to move closer to the Capitol and to police officers guarding the building. Kelly pleaded guilty to entering and remaining in a restricted building or grounds, a charge punishable by a maximum term of imprisonment of 1 year. Prosecutors recommended sentencing Kelly to 3 months of incarceration, and he got 2. All right, that brings us to our break, and when we get back from that break, we will go through weather from around the world, and we will finish up with the stories that we have curated for you today. You are listening to West Coast Cookbook and Speakeasy, and we will be right back.
You are listening to netrootsradio.com.
Please hang up and try again.
From a point at sea to the circles of your mind, a new force is at work for planetary transformation. New radio for a new Earth.
This is Take Two Movie Review. I'm Clinton Johnston. This week, Gimme Shelter. In 2021, actor-comedian Siobhan Fallon Hogan, you remember the person who played Vincent D'Onofrio's character's wife in Men in Black, who was just 3 types of great in a very small scene? Yeah, that's her. So in 2021, Hogan released Rushed, a drama she wrote, produced, and starred in along with Robert Patrick and her son Peter Hogan, who was also a producer, and had it directed by Danish director Vibeke Muyasa, edited by Sabine Emiliani, and cinematographed by Matthias Schubert. So she's just released Rushed and figures now she can rest. She lies down and gets this idea about the intersection of 3 broken people, a prison warden, a death row prisoner, and a has-been, almost never was country singer. She writes it in 3 weeks, gets the crew back together, and 2 years later, Shelter in Solitude is in theaters. Setting the film at the beginning of lockdown, Fallon takes full advantage of how COVID provides the ideal backdrop for stories about companionship and about how people can and must affect each other. Also, lockdown is a money-saving gift as it cuts down on the number of extras you need to make a scene believable. This movie so stayed with me, and on reflection, I think it might be right-leaning, maybe libertarianish, because in it, society's rules and demands leave people financially and relationshipally impoverished, while family connections and Christian creeds, specifically Catholic creeds, draw them together. However, the movie isn't preachy and has an underlying compassion which is compelling, and you can tell that in Hogan, the actor is not far from the writer, because she makes such rich characters that allow people to do good work. Shelter in Solitude is exactly the type of small good movie that the Motion Picture Academy is not going to watch, which is a shame because as much as the Oscars are about quality, and how much they are or aren't is something we can argue, this film should at least get some serious consideration. Oh well, you can still appreciate it. This has been Take 2 Movie Review. I'm Clinton Johnston. Catch up with us at take2moviereview.com and feed us back on our channel on YouTube.
For Science Quickly, I'm Christopher Intagliata. Indonesia's more than 17,000 islands contain the largest expanse of tropical rainforest in Southeast Asia, and they're teeming with biodiversity.
These forests are just incredibly rich.
Conservation scientist Eric Mayerd has worked for more than 3 decades in these forests. He heads up the scientific consulting company Borneo Futures.
Of course, it's hot and sweaty and humid, but there's so much diversity in these forests. There's bird calls everywhere.
Everywhere you look, you see life.
Bill Lawrence is a tropical ecologist at James Cook University in Australia.
The forests are just festooned with plants and animals and birds and everything just chirping away, and it's just this giant bastion of life.
That life is on the brink because Lawrence says Indonesia has an incredible concentration of the world's endangered and critically endangered species.
It's sort of an incredible, magical place in one sense, but it's also a place that's greatly imperiled right now.
And then there's another sort of peril, one facing the scientists who do conservation work there. That's the topic of a recent letter Lawrence and Mayerd published in the journal Current Biology. Writing with a couple Indonesian colleagues, they warn that conservation science in the island nation is under threat.
We were seeing colleagues and researchers that we knew and respected that were being essentially booted out of Indonesia,
including Mayerd himself.
We published a critical letter in an Indonesian newspapers where we questioned the Ministry of Forestry and Environment's statements about growing orangutan populations. And we said, look, we've been looking at this problem for over 30 years and orangutan populations are simply not growing. All 3 species of orangutans are in continuous decline.
He says the government responded quickly by banning him and his colleagues from doing research in the country. A leaked letter from the Indonesian Ministry of Environment and Forestry instructs the country's national parks not to work with Mayerd or approve his research requests, saying his writings could, quote, discredit the government.
And it's really made it much more difficult for us to collaborate with foreign and Indonesian scientists working on conservation issues in Indonesia.
We reached out to the Indonesian government, but have not, at time of publication, received a response. The scientist's paper in Current Biology points out that Indonesia is far from the only country suppressing scientific work. They cite examples from Turkey, Sweden, the US, and Australia too. But in a nation like Indonesia, with so much biodiversity on the brink, the stakes for endangered species are especially high.
If everyone says that orangutan populations are growing and no one is in a position to question that, then orangutan populations are growing.
And that perception becomes a reality, he says.
Without independent science, the government and other groups can completely change the narrative and generate fake realities around what is happening.
And in a world where fake realities have been used to discredit life-saving vaccines or to undermine free and fair elections, it's easy to imagine how fake realities about the state of Indonesia's forests could have very real repercussions for critically endangered species. Science Quickly is produced by Jeff Delvicio, Talika Bose, Kelso Harper, and Corinne Leong. Our theme music was composed by Dominic Smith. Don't forget to subscribe to Science Quickly wherever you get your podcasts. For more in-depth science news and features, go to scientificamerican.com. And if you liked the show, give us a rating or review. For Science Quickly, I'm Christopher Intagliata.
We're the Goo Goo Dolls. We're fortunate that our daughters have what they need to grow and learn. But that isn't the case for nearly 13 million kids in the U.S. that struggle with hunger.
Childhood hunger is a heartbreaking reality that Feeding America is working to change. Each year, the Feeding America network of food banks rescues billions of pounds of good food that would have gone to waste and provides it to families and children in need.
You can help kids in need in your community by visiting feedingamerica.org.
Brought to you by Feeding America and the Ad Council.
Hi, I'm Tom Hartman, and since you're listening to netrootsradio.com, show your progressive side and go to the donate button on the bottom of the homepage. It's progressives like you who power Netroots Radio and keep the progressive message beaming everywhere 24 hours a day. Just go to our donate button at the bottom of netrootsradio.com. Thank you for keeping progressive radio at full power.
You're listening to the American Democracy Minute, keeping your government buy-in for the people. In the 2024 election, Arizona voters may have the opportunity to adopt single-ballot open primaries and ranked choice voting if organizers of two competing proposals succeed in gathering enough signatures. The Arizona Daily Independent reports that both Better Ballot Arizona and Make Elections Fair filed in September to begin the signature gathering process to add their proposals to the November 2024 ballot. Both initiatives would change the state constitution to allow for single-ballot open primaries. Open because Democrats, Republicans, third-party supporters, and unaffiliated voters could all participate in the primary process. Unaffiliated and third-party voters comprise almost 36% of the state's voters. Better Ballot Arizona's proposal would have the top 5 candidates move forward to the general, where ranked choice voting would decide the election, similar to Alaska's system. The Make Elections Fair proposal would have the legislature create a law stipulating how many candidates move to the general election, rather than mandating the number of candidates and the use of ranked choice voting. Open primaries allow voters more choices than just the dominant party candidates, and give third-party or independent candidates an opportunity to compete. More candidates in the general can also mitigate the election of extreme candidates. Signatures must be submitted by July 3rd, 2024. We have more on these proposals at AmericanDemocracyMinute.org. I'm Brian Beal.
I'm Rick Smith, and this is Labor History in 2. On this day in labor history, the year was 1945. That was the day that Paul Robeson received the Spingarn Medal from the NAACP. The award was given annually to the African American with the highest achievement. Robeson certainly fit that criteria. He was born in Princeton, New Jersey. He attended Rutgers University, where he was an athletic standout and valedictorian. He earned his law degree from Columbia. He was a successful singer, as well as stage and film actor. He was also an internationally recognized star, with singing engagements all around the world. Robeson strongly supported labor and working people. He was also an outspoken critic of U.S. colonialism. His stand for social justice made him a target of Senator Joe McCarthy during the hysteria of the Cold War Red Scare. Because of his alleged communist ties, in 1950, Robeson's passport was revoked. It took him 8 years to get it reissued. During that time, he could not travel abroad to perform. The International Union of Mine, Mill, and Smelter Workers invited Robeson Robeson to sing at their Canadian convention in 1952. Since he could not travel, he sang over the telephone. The union then organized a concert on the Washington state-Canadian border. Standing on a flatbed truck parked on the U.S. side of the border, Robeson gave a 45-minute performance to a crowd of 40,000 people. He started the concert by saying, quote, "I stand here today under great stress because I dare, as do you, all of you, to fight for peace and for a decent life for all men, women, and children." Labor History in 2 brought to you by the Illinois Labor History Society and The Rick Smith Show. For more information, go to laborhistoryin2.com.
What does he care if the world's got troubles? What does he care if the land ain't free?
Thank you for accompanying us here to the chef's table at West Coast Cookbook and Speakeasy, Smothered Benedict Wednesdays. We always begin, whether from around the world, along the banks of the Rogue River, in the Rogue River Valley of Southern Oregon on the west coast of the continental United States of America, where it is 47 degrees Fahrenheit, expecting highs in the low 80s. Some clouds this morning will give way to generally sunny skies for the afternoon, and we'll need to expect some mist and reduced visibility at times because we also have a little bit of fog rolling in and out. Clear skies overnight, lows in the low 50s, winds light and variable. Mainly sunny tomorrow with highs in the mid-80s, winds light and variable. And then it looks like we may have some rain coming in late Friday night, early Saturday, and going through the weekend. So I'm looking forward to that. Ragweed pollen has inched back up into the moderate range. The air quality index is in the good range at 25 parts per million, and the daytime UV index is moderate at level 3. Barometric pressure is falling at 30.06 inches. Visibility is around a half mile, and relative humidity is at 100%. Weather from around the world is brought to you by a crowd of crowdsourced weather stations that a crowd crowdsources from around the world, and that is the Weather Underground. London is 56 degrees with rain. Paris is 64 and rain with a thunderstorm advisory that may impact critical infrastructure. Rome is 73 and fair, though they have a wind advisory. Kabul is 55 degrees and clear. Kyiv is 48 and mostly cloudy. Hong Kong is 78 with rain showers. Tokyo is 66 and fair. Melbourne, Victoria, Australia is 58 degrees and clear. San Francisco, California is 59 and fair. Chicago, Illinois is 54 degrees and partly cloudy. And New York, New York is 62 degrees Fahrenheit and cloudy. And that is weather from around the world, brought to you by a crowd of crowdsourced weather stations that a crowd crowdsources from around the world. Staff at the World Desk at the Associated Press brings us this first amuse-bouche here at the chef's table at West Coast Cookbook and Speakeasy, Smothered Benedict Wednesdays. The Swedish security police arrested 2 people yesterday, Tuesday, suspected of gross unauthorized possession of secret information following an early morning police raid where several houses were searched in the greater Stockholm area. Sweden's SAPO, S-A-P-O, SAPO Domestic Security Agency said in a statement, the suspects are now being questioned. It declined to give details on the case or say whether they were Swedish citizens or foreign nationals. It was an operation that was carried out calmly and in connection with these arrests. House searches were also carried out in a number of places where seizures have been made. SAPO's spokesman Fredrik Hultgren Freiberg told Swedish public broadcaster SVT. According to the security agency, yesterday's raid is not connected to previous cases, but is tied to a separate preliminary investigation. The Swedish Prosecution Authority, in a separate statement, said the case is being handled by SAPO under the direction of prosecutors from the National Security Unit. According to the Swedish Criminal Code, the crime of gross unauthorized possession of secret information is one against national security. The difference between it and the more serious crime of espionage is that the latter occurs with the intention of giving the information to a foreign power. Swedish prosecutors will decide whether to detain or release the suspects by midday on Friday.
Je te donne ce mon amour pour la vie entière. La promesse de me trouver à tes genoux. Aussitôt que tu m'appelles, rester toujours fidèle. C'est tout, c'est tout. Je te donne tous mes printemps, mes étés de mer. Mes automnes, quand les feuilles tombent partout. Si ce n'est pas une bonne affaire, je te donne tous mes hivers.
Even more staff at the World Desk of the Associated Press brings us this final amuse-bouche here at the chef's table at West Coast Cookbook and Speakeasy. The lower house of the Russian parliament yesterday, Tuesday, gave preliminary approval to a bill revoking the ratification of a global nuclear test ban in what Moscow has described as a move to put itself on par with the United States. The State Duma voted unanimously to rescind the ratification of the Comprehensive Nuclear Test Ban Treaty known as the CTBT in the first of 3 required readings. The final vote is scheduled for later this week. The vote follows a statement from Vladimir Putin, who warned earlier this month that Moscow could revoke its 2000 decision to ratify the bill to mirror the stand taken by the United States, which has signed but not ratified the nuclear test ban. Speaking during yesterday's session, Duma Speaker Vyacheslav Volodin said the Russian move was a response to what he described as the U.S. boorish attitude to performing its obligations to ensure global security. They thought about themselves as hegemons, proponents of a unilateral world, Volodin said. Today's decision will ring the bell for them. Now, the CTBT, adopted in 1996, bans all nuclear explosions anywhere in the world, although it has never fully entered into force. In addition to the U.S., it is yet to be ratified by China, India, Pakistan, North Korea, Israel, Iran, and Egypt. There are widespread concerns that Russia could move to resume nuclear tests to try to discourage the West from continuing to offer military support to Ukraine. Many Russian hawks have spoken in favor of the resumption. Putin has noted that while some experts have talked about the need to conduct the tests, he hasn't yet formed an opinion on the issue. Russia's Deputy Foreign Minister Sergei Rybakov said last week that Moscow will continue to respect the ban and will only resume nuclear tests if Washington does it first. Well, that's rattling sabers now, isn't it? Lightsabers with nuclear warheads at the tip. Okay, that brings us to the end of our broadcast period for the day. But you do know Netroots Radio broadcasts on, and we will meet up here tomorrow for Metro Shrimp and Grits Thursdays. So do stay tuned to Netroots Radio all day and all night for all the breaking news as it breaks. And we will meet up here tomorrow, right here in West Coast Cookbook and Speakeasy. Bon appetit.
Je voudrais du soleil vert, des dentelles et des théières, des photos de bord de mer, dans mon jardin d'hiver. Je voudrais de la lumière, comme en Nouvelle-Angleterre. Je veux changer d'atmosphère, dans mon jardin d'hiver. Robe à fleurs, sous la pluie de novembre, tes mains qui courent, je n'en peux plus de t'attendre. Les années passent, qu'il est loin, là je tombe. Nul ne peut nous entendre. Je voudrais du Fred Astaire, revoir un latte Goer. Je voudrais toujours te plaire dans mon jardin d'hiver. Je veux déjeuner par terre, comme au long de golfe clair, t'embrasser les yeux ouverts dans mon jardin d'hiver. Sous la pluie de novembre, tes mains qui courent, je n'en peux plus de t'attendre. Les années passent, il est loin, là je tombe. Nul ne peut nous entendre. Ba-da-da-dum-di-da-dum. 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 Dans mon jardin d'hiver. Ba-da-da-dum-di-da-dum. 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 Dans mon jardin d'hiver. Dans mon jardin d'hiver. Dans mon jardin d'hiver.